My name's Hallie Garner, and I head up the research and content initiatives here at EFT. Today's webinar is going to deal with one of the biggest challenges businesses are facing in supply chain and logistics today. I'm joined by Sean Monahan, who's a partner at Kearney, and John Bermudez, who's VP of Products and Strategy at Infor, to discuss further. But before I launch straight into things, just a very quick little bit of housekeeping. First of all, feel free to ask questions. There's a question tab on the right-hand side that you can utilize to ask those questions, and I encourage you to do so. We've got two great experts here that you can actually engage with directly through the webinar. Secondly, the webinar is being recorded, and we will be distributing it after the fact. So if you did cut out or if you had to jump into a meeting or something like that, not to worry, you'll be able to access that later. But without further delay, I'd like to hand things over to John and to Sean. Guys?
Thank you for the introduction there, Hallie. And John, great to be here on the WebEx with you. Let me start off by doing just a brief introduction to A.T. Kearney, provide some context for those of you that aren't familiar with us. So A.T. Kearney is a 90-plus-year-old consultancy, one of the kind of founders of the consulting sector, diverse global management firm with offices in 60 cities around the world. And while we're predominantly known for our operations expertise, which represents over half of our business, we do bring a breadth of services ranging from digital transformation, strategy, leadership change, in organization as well, and we support that across all industry sectors, commercially, as well as a fairly significant government practice as well. So glad to be here today. John, if we can jump to the next slide. As a starting off point for this, hopefully many of you are familiar with the annual State of Logistics report. This is a U.S. focused report, but hopefully also has implications and indications on a global basis. If you're not familiar, the State of Logistics report is last year was its 27th release. It is a collaboration between CSCMP as the sponsor, Penske Logistics, and then A.T. Kearney. We serve as the authors of it. It's released each June, so we're actually right now in the middle of compiling our information for the next release, which will be mid-June this year, so hopefully you can look forward to that. I'll give some indication of where we think that's headed and provide a little bit more detail. But one of the key things that people always look forward to in the report is what we call U.S. BLC, so the U.S. business logistics costs as a percentage of GDP, as an indication of where efficiency is going within our supply chain. So one of the key observations last year was that it declined a little bit, down to 7.85%. It still was continuing to hover at this 5-year trend of approximately 7.9%. So, as I said, we're in the middle of compiling the information for next year. But to give you a little bit of an indication, there are two big buckets of cost that we look at that represent the logistics cost. One is motor carrier as the largest mode, and the other bucket is inventory, which we'll be talking to for most of the rest of my slides. But if you think about, so where did we land most likely in 2016, a couple of key indicators you may want to think about. So one is GDP, so the denominator in this. So 2016, nominal GDP did step back a little bit from 2015, so it came in at about 3% versus 3.5% the prior year. Now truck volume, initial indications from the ATA are that came up. Truck volume was up about 2% over last year, so from a volume perspective, a positive upward trajectory, a little bit less than GDP. When you think about then rates, key component, 2015, as you all may recall, was a year of declining rates, then bottoming out around the end of the year, and then 2016 has been a reversal of that trend, kind of coming upward. Net how the average rates will play out, that's still a bit of a work in process. And then the final kind of big factor that comes into logistics cost being fuel. Now last year was a year of very favorable fuel pricing. Diesel rates actually around 2.31 per gallon versus 2.71 the year before. So bit of a mixed view on where the overall transportation costs will come out, but that gives you a little bit of a sense of where we may be headed for 2016. And as I said, look forward to the release in mid-June, which will be available. John, if we go to the next page. Great. So as I indicated, motor carriers, the largest component of the U.S. business logistics cost. You can see other components being parcel, which is certainly a growing segment related to the growth of e-commerce. Then we have rail, other modes like pipeline, water and ports, and air. And then the next big component being inventory, an inventory carrying cost, which has a couple of different components, one being the storage cost, the biggest component being the financing cost, and then OTs being kind of the other sundry elements of inventory. So if we look a little bit deeper into inventory on the next slide, one of the things we notice is when you look at total U.S. private inventories, where we had been seeing year-on-year growth, and actually inventory had been growing a little bit faster than GDP. As we entered 2015, the trend suddenly flattened as we looked at it last year. It's interesting. A lot of people started to wonder if there was a portending an economic downturn. Were people pulling back on inventories? You may recall a number of that discussion. So what we wanted to do is dig a little bit deeper into it. So we really kind of looked at inventory as a percentage of GDP. So could we see a correlation of that, which we'll see on the next slide. And as you look at this, whereas as inventory is as a percentage of GDP, and if you think of this as just a variation on inventory turns or days of supply, as kind of a measure of the productivity, where lower is better, less inventory to support the level of GDP, or less inventory to support level of sales productivity. We saw a relatively dramatic drop-off in 2015 as we went from this trend of about 4.5%, 14.5% to 14%. This really began to drive a lot of hypotheses, kind of doing playing forensic scientist on what is happening with inventory levels. And there were a variety of discussions that took place. One, was it again this conservatism regarding uncertainty about the U.S. Economy in 2016, where people were beginning to pull back on retail inventories in particular. If you recall, we were also beginning to see the beginning of an uptick in the federal prime rate over through 2016. So the question was, where we had been in a period of very low financing costs and a period of relatively high transportation rates, so people may have been making decisions to forward deploy inventory so to avoid inefficient transportation modes, where we now, as we saw the beginning of increasing rates, where people may be beginning to make a trade-off of saying, well, I'm going to optimize my inventory given that transportation rates were coming down. So a whole variety of kind of questions were beginning to come into play as to what was happening. So if we dug even a little bit deeper into inventory, which we'll show on the next page. I apologize for the bunch of data, but hopefully it is helpful in conveying some of the perspectives. One insight, as we actually went back and looked at the data most recently, is the Bureau of Economic Analysis continuously kind of updates and revises some of the numbers. And so whereas in the original report, it looked like inventory had kind of just fallen flat, basically, with the revision, we actually saw that inventory had gone down 1.7%. So the change in direction was even more dramatic than we originally thought mid last year. When you dig into then the different components and different industry sectors, a couple of interesting kind of insights came out. One, as you looked on the commodity side, the farming and mining sectors, a dramatic pullback in inventory levels or inventory valuations. And one question was, is that a mixture of volume, or also as commodity prices were becoming much more favorable, it's also a valuation of those inventory levels. When you looked then more into the production side, we found that durable manufacturing inventories were relatively flat, but there was a very dramatic step back in non-durables. Those would be things like clothing, food, beverage, paper products, as such. As you took another step down the value chain into the wholesale component, you saw relatively flat, maybe a little bit of an uptick in durable, a little bit of a decline in non-durable, but net probably would be easy to consider that being relatively flat. But then as we went down, the next level in the value chain, we saw that from a retail perspective, the big components of food and beverage, general merchandising, so your grocery and kind of mass stores, saw that inventory levels had been flat, despite the growth in the economy. But motor vehicle and other retail inventory levels actually jumped up dramatically, faster than GDP growth. And we've seen some of that production as the automotive sector has come back, and a lot more pushing forward of inventory. And then other retail, which has a whole variety of different industry sectors within it, including e-commerce in particular. So the question is this portending of a shift of inventory levels from traditional retail into things such as e-commerce, and to where that's being distributed? As we look into 2016, so we're still continuing to look into this, to give you a sense of where that might be headed. Overall, we saw that inventories are up nominally. So whereas we had gone down last year, they're actually up a bit in 2016. When you dig into the sectors, we find that, once again, farm inventories are down. We're going to be digging into that a little bit deeper to, again, understand, is it the levels and volumes, or is it more driven by the valuation of those commodities? When we look through the value chain, we saw that manufacturing is up again, so maybe a sign of increased confidence in production, particularly in durable goods. There's been a step up in inventory. When we look down into the wholesale, we see that it's up in non-durables, kind of reversing the prior year trend. So again, is that refilling the pipeline, a sign of increased confidence in the U.S. economy, which certainly if we look at things such as the University of Michigan's Consumer Confidence Index has been running very positive for the last 6+ months. And then we look at retail, seeing kind of very similar trend where auto is up again this year, and then other is also up again, while food and beverage and general merchandising continue to be relatively flat overall. So again, kind of a bit of a mixed signals, but I think generally we're seeing increased confidence in the economy, people beginning to fill up inventories a little bit more aggressively than we had seen in 2015 as we looked at the report. We take a longer term view. If we look on the next slide, one of the things we've been particularly interested in is how are people looking at inventory productivity? Certainly, as we work with a number of our clients, working capital management, inventory is a key issue that everyone is wrestling with. There's been a view of trying to leverage new technologies, whether they be visibility tools, whether they be advanced analytics, and then even more recently, the past probably 6 to 12 months, beginning to apply artificial intelligence to both improve forecasting as well as looking at applications to improve production scheduling and inventory management. But if you look over the last, since about January 2011 through this year, if you look at total inventories, this includes farm and non-farm inventory, you see that this downward trend in inventory to sales, which is again a sign of growing productivity, has been very steady change. But as we've noted, a big driver that has been the farm side of that. So if you unwind the farm and look at non-farm inventories, which would be more the traditional manufacturing segments, you find that while the trend had been very similar for the last several years, over 2016 we began to see a bit of an upward trend, so kind of a step back from those productivity gains. And it's really prompting a lot of questions in our mind. Is it just a increased confidence in where the economy is headed, or is it an opportunity? Because as we've indicated, if you think about some of the key cost elements, the federal prime rate has continued to step up fairly dramatically the last several months. If you think about, we had been at 3.5% for most of 2016, which is about a quarter point up over the prior 7 years. And now we've gone up half a point just since December. So the cost of capital, and we see that also flowing through in weighted average cost of capital measurements. And then in a tight warehousing market, where we're sitting at kind of historical lows of warehouse capacity, availability, and we saw warehousing rates go up over 6% in 2016. Should manufacturers and retailers be making different decisions? Should they really be paying more attention to working capital? And is there a bit of an untapped opportunity to leverage all these new technologies related to visibility, inventory optimization, artificial intelligence for forecasting that producers and retailers can all take advantage of, which is what we see as a bit of an untapped opportunity as working capital becomes much more precious over the coming years. So that's a little bit of the kind of historical context and directionally where we see things going as we look towards the next release of our state logistics report. And maybe John, as someone who's one of those key technology enablers, it'd be great to hand off to you.
Thanks, Sean. Just going to switch here to different PowerPoint. So thank you, Sean. That was very insightful. So Sean took you through our inventory levels, and it's obviously a key focus for all companies. On one hand, inventory is something that is a measurement of on the balance sheet. It's controlled. It's something in one case we're trying to minimize. In the other case, it's the lifeblood of our company because it generates the revenue from the products we sell. So what I wanted to go through this morning is this notion of how to better manage inventory, how to build a more agile supply chain using this concept of a supply chain network. Just a little quick background on who Infor is, Infor GT Nexus. Infor GT Nexus has been in the supply chain space for more than 25 years. We've got through our supply chain network more than $500 billion in goods managed. More than 30,000 companies are hooked to our GT Nexus supply chain platform, operating in over 65 countries. And we have more than 9,500 on-premise software installations in addition to our cloud. But most importantly, if you look at the supply chain network, there's more than 250 logistics providers, 13,000 carriers operating on it, and we manage more than 11 million container shipments across this network. So in the question of where your inventory is, a good deal of it is being managed by our GT Nexus network. So the critical question when it comes to inventory is always, where's my stuff? Whether it's the inbound components that are feeding your manufacturing plant, and or whether it's the inventory that's driving your finished goods revenue. It's critical to know where my stuff is and how I get it to across a very complex supply chain at the lowest possible cost, while minimizing inventory, but having enough inventory to drive the revenue levels that I expect. And obviously doing it all efficiently. So when we look at inventory in charts and through software, it's easy to look at it as a number. When we look at the global supply chain, we have to remember that a lot of piece parts have to come together to get that inventory from where it's sourced to where it's actually sold. And answering the question of where's my stuff is a very complex question when you consider that 80% of the data needed to effectively manage your supply chain to get that inventory from where it's originally sourced through the very many steps and partners who help manufacture, deliver, and sell that inventory happens across a complex global supply chain. And one of the key things that companies are looking for these days in managing inventory is visibility. One of the key concepts about managing inventory is having a very agile supply chain. In order to have an agile supply chain, it's very important that I know where my inventory is, how long it takes to get from one point to the next. I'm also able to mitigate all types of risks. Inventory is generally, we use higher inventory levels to buffer risk. At the same time, that costs money. And also having too much inventory can reduce agility as it leads to excess inventories, overstocks, and ultimately the need to sell that inventory at a reduced price. So it's visibility is really essential. And one of the things that we're seeing with many companies is that what was a nice to have 5-6 years ago when it came to global visibility is a must-have. Companies are trying to do the most with their inventory investments, which means having the right level of inventory moving through the supply chain, not too much, not too little, but looking to be much more effective at predicting where they need that inventory so that it drives the revenue expectations. You know, a simple example of that is if you think about a fashion manufacturer bringing in their spring line of clothes, synchronizing that with a TV advertisement. They want the spring line in the stores, ready to sell when that TV advertisement hits. So if it's a week late, that could mean tens of millions of dollars of TV advertising revenue that literally was wasted because the merchandise is not in the store. So any of that can be adjusted. TV ad campaigns can be adjusted. Stores can move out promotions if inventory is not there, but knowing that the inventory is not going to be there allows a company to react and make the right decisions, either change what is being promoted or work with the advertising people to push that campaign out. But visibility is essential to driving any of those changes, and in today's supply chains, companies are focused at manipulating and using that data as precisely as that. And one of the other challenges with managing inventory across a global supply chain is disruptions. And through all those disruptions and potential disruptions, the answer is not always just increase inventory. That was an answer from 20 years ago, but today companies are looking to build much more agile supply chains. They're looking to be much more predictive and prescriptive about how inventory moves through that supply chains, the expected on-time delivery dates they give their customers. Obviously looking to collaborate both internal and external. The example I gave you with a fashion retailer synchronizing the delivery of goods to stores to television advertising is one of the ones that is a very real example. In order to do that, it's very important to have those insights, and when a shipment's going to be late, know what actions you can take. So if we look at what it was take to build a next generation supply chain, first and foremost, you hear a lot about digital business. Well, digital business really starts with a digital supply chain. It's hard to have a digital business if you don't know where the critical inventory is that you need to make your business work is. So having real-time information is having the data you need to make informed decisions, being able to automate processes as much as possible so that you're leveraging the power of the network, of your computer technology, and best using your people and resources to manage the true exceptions and automate decision-making wherever possible. Next, it's important that it be networked. As we talked about, the global supply chains are comprised of many trading partners that are not only suppliers, but the transportation and carriers that get your goods to market, your own internal and external resources, your retail partners, your distributors, all have a critical part in making your supply chain work. So having it networked, which includes the people, the assets, having it in the cloud, making it a single source of truth. You know, one of the challenges we've had for years with conventional on-premise systems is that data must move from through various complex communication links from one company to the next, and literally, generally, it moved one step down the supply chain. This idea of the network supply chain allows that one version of the truth to be in the cloud and have everybody who's participating in moving that inventory from source to delivery able to see it, able to make intelligent decisions about how it moves and ensure that the service levels are achieved. And a key part of having all the partners participate is the idea of transparency. From the origin to delivery, having that visibility, making sure that all the participants know where it needs to go, when it needs to be there, and what the options are to make decisions. In the case of my example, once again, of the fashion retailer trying to stock stores with the spring fashion line, they may decide that a container that's destined to be on a ship that's now going to be 3 days late is too much of a risk, and may empower their freight forwarders to put that on an airplane and fly it to the distribution center rather than risk it being 3 days late, changing to 5 days late, and possibly being out of sync with the ad campaign. But the key to be able to make that decision is having that transparency across the supply chain and making everybody aware what the goals are. You know, and when you take that decision, this whole notion of being collaborative, things like supply chain disruptions, whether it's a port strike, an unexpected tropical storm that's going to affect shipping lanes, having multiple parties in the supply chain to be able to collaborate to determine what should we do. If there's a threat of a storm that could delay shipments a week, do we make the decision to fly some of the merchandise so that it's in those stores for those spring delivery? Or have we determined from the carrier's input that the ship will sail, the storm is not significant, and the inventory will make the port of discharge on time? So collaboration ensures much better alignment across the supply chain, that all parties, and not just the immediate supplier, but trading partners, freight forwarders, trucking companies, rail lines, shipping companies, everybody's collaborating to move that inventory in a timely fashion. And with that collaboration, it's much easier to have reduced inventories, but still have inventory moving effectively through that supply chain to drive the revenue necessary. Intelligence. One of the things about having a next generation supply chain, having everybody collaborating, all the data in this network platform, is this ability to use that to be much more predictive and prescriptive. Concepts like using machine learning against the data that I'm accumulating in that network to determine what does a 2 days of lateness mean when it's being loaded at a port in China. Does that mean it'll be only 2 days late when it gets to Long Beach, California? Is it also possible that the carrier makes up that time? Or is it possible that 2 days worth of delays turns into 3 and 4 days of delay by the time it gets there? Using machine learning, the intelligence or the data being compiled across a network, it's now possible to have the network tell us what those mean. And also when you think about how we manage our inventory, a lot of the data we use or have used in the past is very static. We use fixed delivery dates, fixed lead times, and we all know the world doesn't work in fixed lead times, fixed delivery dates. Strikes happen, storms happen, accidents happen at ports. Lots of things can cause a delay. Lots of things can cause something to actually happen early. The better we can predict that, the more effective we can be with the inventory in that supply chain. And so you'll see, and certainly here at GT Nexus, we're applying computer algorithms, machine learning, to use all of that data and enable the supply chain logistics people to make much more intelligent decisions, and even go beyond just making, presenting that information to people, having the algorithms actually make decisions for you, so that you can focus on more critical issues. And then last but not least, maybe one of the most important parts of having a network platform is that it be resilient. And by resilient, we mean that it can recover from various global events, that all the participants on the network actually benefit from being on the network. So whether it's a transportation provider that knows exactly what the delivery date is, and then actually can respond to a change in that delivery destination or date, or whether it's a supplier, a small supplier trying to help a big company scale up a new product, who's concerned about working capital and can find financing on the network provided through a bank that specializes in financing suppliers' working capital. And when you think about things moving through the network, financing can be provided because the whole network is actually acting to validate that the inventory has been shipped, and financing can be provided at a very low risk, because often possibly a big retailer or a big manufacturer is actually paying for that inventory, so the bank has very little risk in providing that funding to a small supplier. So this whole concept of digital supply chain networks are really the future, something where a number of participants throughout the supply chain can collaborate on one single version of the truth. And just to give you an idea how that works, as we look at as the supply chain, as manufacturers initiate orders to suppliers, those become customer orders at the suppliers, be able to push that information to raw material suppliers. Once again, think about this from an inventory turn. The more information the raw material suppliers, component suppliers have, they can operate with less inventory, have the right inventory, and also be more effective. And that as we move through the whole supply chain, be able to collaborate on changes so that we can dynamically shift as the market shifts, that we can pay through the network and help smaller suppliers participate on a global level, ensure that the financial institutions that provide that financing will get paid. And then certainly tie in that other very critical link of the supply chain, which is the transportation and logistics providers that make the global supply chain work. Very few companies today have the wherewithal to manage their transportation across a global supply chain. Even the biggest companies, which do some management themselves, also rely on logistics providers, for some assistance. And the idea of having it on a network means that we can manage part of it ourselves and then depend on logistics providers to manage the rest. So the key digital supply chains enable us to, first and foremost, maximize revenue. As I mentioned, inventory is often something we think about reducing, but on the other hand, it is a critical item to drive revenue. Digital supply chains also allow us to reduce costs. Inventory is a cost. Expediting is a cost. Obsolescence is a cost. And the capital tied up in inventory can be freed up by making that inventory move through the supply chain a lot more quickly. And most importantly, the digital supply chain enables us to better meet customer expectations, which means having the inventory where it needs to be at the time it needs to be there. Just a few quick examples. One from Caterpillar, who uses the digital supply chain network to manage all of their inbound supply to ensure all of their factories are running smoothly across a number of very complex supply chains, and then outbound to support more than 170 dealers around the world, all managed from the sources of supply to the actual dealers and customers. You know, another critical piece about having a digital supply chain is being able to do integrated business planning. Knowing where your inventory is critical, but knowing when exceptions pop up, how do we determine whether that's a critical exception relative to what I need to drive revenue and deliver that inventory. So being able to integrate our business planning with this supply chain, the supply chain network is critical to meeting customer commitments. You know, a company that exhibits that and does it very well is Quimico Ampara. Quimico Ampara is a very large consumer products company making cleaning products, soap powder products, laundry detergent in Brazil, shipping more than 90 million cases a week. They do an excellent job of synchronizing the sources of supply with their 10 production plants and delivering to more than 3,500 customers. And by synchronizing the flow of goods through the supply chain, being very diligent about their sales and operation process, have managed to decrease finished goods inventory by more than 20%, reduce freight costs, and increase service levels and reduce any fines from customers. So in summary, it's critical to know where's my stuff. Inventory is revenue for just about all companies, but obviously it's very important that we minimize the wrong inventory and we make sure that the right inventory is in the right place. Visibility enables that better decision making. It's hard to make a decision if you really don't have the basis for knowing how it'll impact inventory and how you can better move it through the supply chain. And last, digital supply chain networks are part of the future. They're providing vital global inventory visibility, enabling companies to work and collaborate effectively. And most importantly, enabling a whole supply chain to work as one to deliver the service levels the customers expect. So with that, I think I'll turn it back to our moderator, Haley.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Sean, as well for your very interesting insights there. I'm going to jump straight into Q&A, actually, just because we are running a little bit tight on time, and there's a lot of questions to get to. So one of the first ones, which I thought was quite interesting, and this relates a bit more perhaps to your presentation, Sean, was looking at the transformative impact of digital delivery of media on inventory levels. I wonder if you could speak to that at all.
Okay.
So just in the sense that digital delivery of things like books, music, video, obviously means you don't. Yeah.
No, absolutely. So I think it's absolutely right in that there's no physical product, so it's inventory, so as a result, that could be a driver, because particularly, I think that'd be the primary question, and even if just look more forward, everyone gets excited about additive manufacturing. There's a lot of debate over what will that do to inventory levels. If I can make things on demand. So I think looking at inventory is going to be an interesting topic for the years ahead as we think about as it changes its position in the value chain, as it changes levels. Is that a sign of better inventory practices or a transformation of how we actually do business these days? I'm not sure if that got direct to the question, but no,
I mean it's a fair crack at it for sure, though. John, did you have a take on it as well, or?
No, I think Sean covered it as well as this can be covered.
Yeah, I mean, basically the future sort of, holds what the future does, and it will have an impact on inventory. But, well, listen, moving on then to the next one here. Well, in fact, you mentioned additive manufacturing there, and we did get a question on 3D printing and additive manufacturing, basically. And but maybe a bit sort of more broadly, not just about inventory. How is 3D printing going to sort of impact supply chain models and the dynamics there? I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, let me take a stab at that, and actually encourage some people. We recently did a collaborative effort with the World Economic Forum. We just published the report on 5 future technologies, of which additive is one of them, and you can explore things like artificial intelligence, IoT, robotics, wearables, particularly augmented reality. So when we looked at additive, we do see it as having a very transformative effect. The pace of that is probably a little bit less than the hype. If you read some of the papers, it sounds like additive is going to transform manufacturing within the next 5 years. We see that as probably closer to 2030, probably the back half of the next decade, that'll truly be transformative in terms of the percentage of GDP that's being impacted. But in many areas, particularly things such as low volume spares, so whether it be for aging mining and farming equipment that needs a critical spare, we see that as being a real growth opportunity. We actually had the first structural 3D printed product was used in an aircraft, a Harrier jet, used a structural component back in September. And there's increasing indication that particularly Boeing is going to be using a lot more 3D printed metal parts. They use a lot of 3D printed plastic parts now, but they're going to be moving more into metals over the coming years. So we see that actually will have a very dramatic impact. It'll probably work primarily, as I said, from spares through medical devices before we get into higher volume kind of production components. So yes, it's coming, but still think we'll be relying on a lot of traditional inventory methods for the next, certainly 5 to 10 years.
Absolutely. And John, from your side, are these the types of things that you're looking to build into the systems you're designing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very interesting topic. I agree with Sean that the hype is far in advance of the reality, but we look at it a number of different ways. One of the As much as it's nice to think about 3D printing parts at various places in the supply chain, it will help reduce, in some cases, greenhouse gases, because it means we're not shipping something, we're sending an electronic image. But when you think about what it would take to print lots of different parts out of lots of different materials, the need to transfer the latest design and the latest digital copy of that product to that printer will still require a vast network. So we actually see this idea of making your supply chain digital will enable you to determine where can I make that part and which machine is free and what's the trade-off between shipping the part and the cost of printing it out. We all know that the strides being made in digital printing are incredible. As Sean mentioned, putting a part in a Harrier jet is a pretty major accomplishment. But at the end of the day, printing a part out a complex part out can take hours. So is it faster to source something from a warehouse 2 states away and ship it because you need this part urgently and I can get it there in 4 hours? Or am I waiting for a printer to free up to print this part, which also happens to be an hour away from where it's actually needed? So, but I think the key to making all those decisions is having a digital supply chain so you know what the choices are.
Absolutely, and that ties into a question that that's come in here actually as well, and it's one that sort of been nagging me also, and that is, what is the best starting point, assuming an incremental build of a world-class system? So really, how do you begin digital transformation?
Well, I think it's key to start enabling your supply chain through better digital connections to the various parts of your supply chain. If you think about, many companies have spent, ever since the late 90s, where everybody was worried about Y2K, companies have enabled their internal supply chains with lots of very powerful systems, but they still have a weak link when it comes to the external. So starting to connect to a digital supply chain network, it'll not only help you have a more agile supply chain, but it'll also help you identify weak links in your own internal supply chain. Many companies find as they connect to a digital supply chain that they have to improve the information that they have, and ultimately it allows them to manage both the internal and external supply chain a lot more effectively. And they quickly identify giant opportunities for savings. When you can't see what's actually happening across the global supply chain, you don't know what you don't know. So I'd say the best place to start, you can start with a digital supply chain. Many of the largest freight forwarders can also help provide critical digital services to help enable and improve the global inventory visibility.
Perfect. Sean, did you want to chime in there? What are you seeing from your research perspective in terms of starting on that digital transformation journey?
Yeah, it's one thing that's also important to ground people on is when you say digital transformation, like what are you putting in that that envelope? We tend to think of digital transformation as not just kind of connecting the information backbone, which is critical, but also a lot of these other digital technologies, so whether they be like augmented reality, whether they be robotics, artificial intelligence. So, our key premise is a couple different things. One is you have to start connecting the unconnected. The vast majority of systems or even devices on a manufacturing floor are unconnected. So if you really want to be able to have this visibility, you need to create this digital thread which goes all the way up and down your value chain from your supplier all the way through to your customer or your consumer. So that's a natural starting point. I think very consistent with what John talked about. The other step is you have to begin experimenting with some of these newer technologies. So if you want to have visibility and you've connected things within your plant, how do you use augmented reality to now enable your workforce to be more productive in assembling products, and checking, maintaining pumps and processes on your shop floor, or using artificial intelligence to optimize your production settings given the quality of the input ingredients that you have. And each company's journey is a little bit different. We find you need to not take a use case you've seen work someplace else and say, well, I'm just going to go try that, but really think about the power of what if you could change something, or you had information available, and be inspired by some of these technologies in terms of where you could really begin to make a change in your network. But the key is these technologies are changing so fast right now, really kind of an exponential curve, that you have to start doing some form of experimenting and immersing yourself in the capabilities.
Absolutely. Well, I'm afraid we're running quickly out of time here, so I'm going to actually wrap things up where we stand there. And I feel like we've only just started actually with the discussion going, with so many different facets to cover here. And I'm afraid we've only gotten to a couple of the questions from the audience so far. But what I can say is that we will be, I will take all the questions that were asked and we'll push them out towards the speakers so that they can be answered at a later date on a sort of email level there. But just again, we've got recordings of the webinar, and we will be pushing those out early next week. And I wanted to thank everybody for tuning in, and of course I wanted to thank Sean and John both for their presentations today. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Hallie.